This video is brought to you by my wonderful channel members. If you're interested in joining the channel membership, I'll leave a link down below in the description box, but it basically comes with content polls once a month where I do a deep dive video such as this, as well as planetary magic forecasts. We also have a private Discord server, and we have a book club going on right now too. So if you're interested in that, again, link will be in the description box. Alchemy is a very broad term that spans over many continents, many millennia, and many different philosophical practices. I would define alchemy as the art and science of transmutation as it pertains to the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. But really, there are two types of alchemy. There is the exoteric version of alchemy, which is more concerned with the material. This is where you hear alchemists turning base metals into gold. And then there are the esoteric applications, which more pertain to mental and spiritual alchemy. And if you look up videos on alchemy on YouTube or anywhere else, there is a heavy emphasis on the exoteric traditions of alchemy, the physical side of things of alchemists turning lead into gold. But there isn't as much available on the spiritual and philosophical side, the esoteric side of alchemy. And it makes sense. The exoteric or physical side of alchemy, of alchemists turning lead into gold, was kind of a precursor to chemistry. And our society is very dominated by the sciences, but I think it's also important to consider mental and spiritual alchemy. So in this video, I really want to talk about all three. We're going to talk about physical alchemy, spiritual alchemy, and mental alchemy. In this video, I will be providing a very brief history of alchemy, though the history is vast and it spans again across many millennia, across many continents, so I encourage you to further your research on this subject. But in order to discuss alchemy, we need to go all the way back to ancient Egypt. Some say that the word alchemy comes from an Arabic word for alchemia, which basically means chemistry, and this word is rooted in the Greek word chem. This Greek word chem was passed down from the ancient Egyptians with slightly different spelling, and to the ancient Egyptians, chem referred to the natural process of transformation along the banks of the Nile River. So every year the Nile would flood and there would be this deposit of chem, which was this rich, black, fertile soil that the ancient Egyptians used in agriculture. And this video wouldn't be complete if I didn't at least briefly mention Thoth in a video of alchemy, of course. So Thoth is a god in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, and he has a very complicated history, mythology. I'm not really going to get into that in this video, but according to Egyptian legend, Thoth is the one that passed down this knowledge of alchemy to the ancient Egyptians. He was the god of knowledge and wisdom and writing. There were a lot of ancient Egyptian scribes that were dedicated to him, and the role of the scribe for ancient Egyptians was so sacred that sometimes scribes were considered sorcerers, and this led to an association of writing and magic being married together. This transformed Thoth from this god of wisdom and writing and knowledge to this god of also magic and mysticism. And though Thoth rules over many different things, he is said to have written one of the most important alchemy texts, which is the Emerald Tablet. This text inspired many alchemists and many scientists over the next few millennia, including Isaac Newton, who we will also talk about a little bit later in this video when we actually talk about different alchemists and what they ended up doing. And then the Greeks started to associate Thoth with their god Hermes. Medieval alchemists later on referred to him as Hermes Trismegistus, and the pronunciation for his last name is all over the place. Nobody can agree how to properly pronounce that. But Hermes Trismegistus really became the combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. From ancient Egypt, the idea of alchemy spread across the world to multiple different continents. And in different parts of the world, alchemists had different goals, different experiments that they were doing, different inventions, and we're also going to talk about that a little bit further in this video. But basically, Arab culture came in contact with Europe by way of southern Italy and Spain, and this allowed an exchange of Arab ideas, including the ideas of alchemy. Arab texts were translated into Latin, and then from there it spread to different parts of Europe and different parts of Asia. Now, the Christian churches hated this. The church absolutely hated this. They thought the alchemists were dabbling a little bit too much into that evil magic, and so alchemists attempted to code their experiments in Christian language so that it would be accepted a little bit more. But it wasn't enough to convince the church, and I'm sure you've heard of alchemists writing all of their experiments in code, where some words will mean something completely different than they actually did in the experiments, and there were a couple reasons for this. Part of it was from the church and wanting to hide what they were actually doing doing for fear of persecution. And the other part was that they simply didn't want to share their findings with other alchemists. They wanted to write it in their own code language so that no one could steal it. Eventually, alchemy was attacked as a superstition, and people were persecuted for practicing this. So this is when practitioners started doing it in private. Alchemy ended up going underground during the 18th century, and it was really only practiced by secret societies before it eventually died out. And then of course there was a revival. The revival of alchemy, some people really credit Carl Jung for this. So alchemy returned back to the scene in the 20th century, and Carl Jung had taken a huge interest in alchemy. If you don't know who Carl Jung is, he was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and we can credit a lot of what we know in the psychology field thanks to Carl Jung and his archetypes, his work with the collective unconscious. He also dabbled into the occult a little bit, so he was very much into alchemy and mysticism. And so you'll find this crossover of a lot of people that are interested in psychology and the occult really end up loving Carl Jung's work. But the mental aspect of alchemy is what really appealed to Carl Jung, and he was actually using those philosophies as he was treating his patients. And so today, Jungian psychology has really given rise to this idea of mental alchemy. Let's discuss the exoteric applications of alchemy, and this pertains more to the physical side of alchemy. So this was focused on transmutation of physical substances. So the idea was to transform actual substances by way of using the elements: earth, water, air, and fire. And then 3 more elements were added later on to this: mercury, salt, and sulfur. But this is basically where alchemists were attempting to turn lead into gold. Physical alchemy is all about the practical in-laboratory applications, and the idea was to attempt to turn base metals into higher metals. Many astrological symbols were also used in alchemical texts, so the 7 traditional planets were often used, and they correlated with the 7 metals of alchemy. So the sun related to gold, the moon related to silver, Mercury related to mercury obviously, Venus related to copper, Mars related to iron, Jupiter was tin, and Saturn is lead. One of the more strange techniques used by medieval alchemists was a process called palingenesis. This process was used to understand the idea of therapeutic compounds, which was this idea that you could bring things back to life by burning them and then freezing the ashes. As I mentioned in the brief history section of this video, when alchemy exploded from ancient Egypt and went to all different continents, different alchemists in different regions of the world had different goals. There were many different kinds of alchemies across Eurasia. Chinese alchemy was tied to the idea of earth itself. In Chinese natural philosophy, the earth is an actual living organism. Chinese alchemists detected the earth's channels of energy by using magnets, which this ended up leading to the system of feng shui. And this work eventually led to the invention of gunpowder. In Chinese alchemy, there is also this search for immortality called Waidan, and alchemy inadvertently ended up playing a big role in traditional Chinese medicine. Indian alchemy focused on medicine and how to achieve an undecayable body. Islamic alchemy ended up blending Aristotelian, Indian, and Chinese alchemy all together. Aristotelianism, by the way, is the work that was inspired by Aristotle. There was a man born in Persia around 721 by the name of Jabir ibn Han, and there is a little bit of a theory that surrounds him. So he was a chemist, alchemist, astrologer, engineer, etc., and he is credited to offering over 3,000 texts, including a version of the Emerald Tablet, which we talked about earlier in this video. And then we have more well-known alchemists from the Western world, such as Sir Isaac Newton. Most of us have heard of him at least. We know Sir Isaac Newton as the inventor of calculus. He did a lot of other things though too. He discovered the laws of gravity, he worked with the principles of light, as well as the laws of motion, so this guy was busy. He was doing a lot of stuff. And Robert Boyle, who is also considered one of the fathers of chemistry, was also an alchemist. So alchemy was really at the root of many different sciences, not just chemistry. Let's talk about the famous Philosopher's Stone. So there was this legendary substance that was said to be the ultimate key for transmutation. It had many names. It was mainly called materia prima. It was also called the tincture or the powder. Alchemists truly believed that this stone could be the elixir for life. It had the power to cure illnesses. It had the power to grant immortality. It had the power to, yes, turn that base metal into gold. And so many alchemists sought out this Philosopher's Stone. And 2 of the most well-known Western alchemists, Sir Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, are 2 that deeply sought this out. And then there was Nicholas Flamel. And for any Harry Potter fans out there, yes, Nicholas Flamel was an actual person that lived, not just in a Harry Potter story. You can tell the author from Harry Potter really took a lot of inspiration from alchemy, especially with the symbols of the Deathly Hallows and things like that. So Nicholas Flamel was helped by this Spanish scholar who was very educated in Kabbalah, and Kabbalah is a form of Jewish mysticism. Flamel claims to have actually turned lead into gold, and no one knows for sure if his claim is actually true or not. Some people say that he faked his death and he is immortal and he's still living to this day. Obviously, there is no proof of that, so think what you will. So now that we've discussed the exoteric applications and how physical alchemy really played a huge role in a lot of the modern day sciences that we all practice, I want to move on into the esoteric applications. So this is where we get into spiritual alchemy and mental alchemy. Many alchemists will say that if you are not accessing the esoteric part of alchemy, the spiritual and mental transformation, you're not doing real alchemy. Because it's not just about physical alchemy, it's also the transformation within as you're doing these physical applications. Alchemists were equally as committed with their physical applications as they were to their internal transformation. And this is primarily because it was believed among alchemists that only someone who was pure in soul could actually achieve the goal of turning base metals into higher metals. Later in this video, we're going to talk about the 7 alchemical processes, and that whole process, the 7 steps in that, applies to physical alchemy as well as mental and spiritual. It's just more symbolically when it comes to the mental and the spiritual. So let's start with spiritual alchemy. It's important to know that alchemists do not consider the spirit and the soul as the same thing. In fact, they are 2 very different things. One's spirit is said to be associated with the Red King, and this spirit is always striving towards betterment. On the other hand, the soul is more concerned with contentment in the moment, and it is associated with the White Queen. So these opposing forces of the spirit and the soul need to come together to create a marriage in order to transform ourselves into our highest golden self. So this union between the Red King and the White Queen as it pertains to our soul and our spirit was really, really important. This union between the Red King and the White Queen was called a sacred union. And this is something that I don't see talked about a lot in many of the videos that I've seen on alchemy. It's such an important component to alchemy because as alchemists are doing physical alchemy in a laboratory, they are also undergoing this whole spiritual union between the soul and the spirit, working to bring the Red King and the White Queen in union with each other so they can achieve this more enlightened state of being. One thing I really love about alchemy is that it is centered around the person's willpower in order to create this change. You are not necessarily praying to some gods above in order to have this change magically happen to you. You are using your own willpower, your own determination, and your own drive to really transform yourself mentally, spiritually. There is this emphasis that you are the only person that can make that change for yourself. There's also this concept of working with the alchemical dragon, which basically transforms chaotic energy so you can reach that stage of enlightenment or that golden being. So if this is something that you are interested in, definitely let me know and I can make a separate video about the alchemical dragon and maybe just a separate video about spiritual alchemy in general. But moving on to mental alchemy, the changes were said to be not long lasting unless you changed your mind as well. Carl Jung was a major contributor to mental alchemy, of course, as we discussed in the history section of this video. Carl Jung saw mental alchemy as the key to unlocking human consciousness. He also credited alchemy for his understanding of the collective unconscious. So the whole idea about mental alchemy is to break down what is rigid in our mind and in our identities, but the rigidity is referred to as salt. So as we know, salt is a solid, and in mental alchemy, the salts of our identities are referring to these rigid pieces. And it's basically the part of our ego or the part of our identities that are really limiting ourselves. So if you've ever noticed a child being totally curious and free to play and with little to no restrictions on their thinking or what they want to do, but as we grow into adults, we become a little bit more stoic, a little bit more cynical, a little bit more rigid. That is where we start to see salts developing in our identities, basically telling us, no, I can't do that. I can't do this one thing because XYZ. And in order to break down these personality salts, we have to tap back into what's called first matter. And this is something that's also called prima materia. First matter is chaotic. It is like that raw, dragon-like energy. It is very similar to the Hindu concept of Brahman and also the physics string theory. And it may seem really silly what I'm about to say, but one of the best ways to harness first matter and to really start breaking down the salts in your identity and your mind is to simply seek out new experiences. Whenever you feel yourself, your internal monologue going, saying, oh, that's something that I can't do, you push yourself to do it anyways. And again, if you are interested in a mental alchemy video, maybe I'll do separate videos, one for spiritual alchemy and one for mental alchemy, so we can deep dive into these concepts a little bit more. So definitely let me know if that's something that you are interested in. So now that we've discussed physical alchemy, mental alchemy, and spiritual alchemy, I did briefly want to mention there are other forms of alchemy out there. There is artistic alchemy. In fact, one of my favorite books on alchemy is called Splendor Solis, and it's the world's famous alchemical manuscript, as it says on the front, but the artwork in here is just gorgeous. But artistic alchemy can involve dyes, paints, sculpting, perfume, jewelry making, many other different types of artistic endeavors, and some contemporary artists view themselves as modern alchemists. There are even some photographers who identify as alchemists and have created entire portfolios to what they call artistic alchemy. This book not only has gorgeous artwork, but it has a lot of wonderful education in it, so if you are interested in an alchemical text, this one is definitely one of my favorites. Although it really just depends on what kind of alchemy you're looking for, of course, because there are so many other alchemy books that I could recommend, so maybe we'll do an alchemy book review video as well. But before we move on, let me actually just give you one more book recommendation in case I don't get to that other video really soon. If you are interested in deep diving into this subject a little bit more, again, there's so many other books that I could recommend that really do excellent deep dives, but I want to recommend this beginner guide to alchemy, and this is by Sarah Dern. This is a very beautiful book, and honestly, I don't typically go for the pretty books because I feel like the more Instagrammable a book is, typically the less I can relate to the information because I don't feel like it has enough depth, I don't feel like it has enough sources, but I actually really liked this book. So if you're a beginner and you're wanting to get into the subject a little bit more, I think this book is a great place to start, and then of course move on to bigger, beefier books that can really deep dive into the subject. Collectively, the 7 stages of alchemy make up what's called the Great Work. It is also called the Magnum Opus. This results in a purification and a refinement of any material into its highest form. So this is applicable for physical alchemy, spiritual alchemy, and mental alchemy. And it is believed that if an alchemist can achieve these 7 stages, if the 7 stages of alchemy are successful, then the alchemist is said to achieve the Philosopher's Stone, which is the holy grail and can transform anything into its golden form. So there are 7 stages in this process, and there are 3 phases of those 7 stages. And honestly, this deserves to be its whole separate video as well. So I'll just give you a brief overview in this video. Again, if you're interested in this, I will maybe potentially make an alchemy series, because to really fully explore the 7 different alchemical processes it would take to dissect each one. But the 3 phases of the 7 stages are called the blackening, the whitening, and the reddening. The first stage is called calcination, and this is where you are basically burning a substance down to nothing, down to ash. Stage 2 is called dissolution. So this is where you are dissolving the substance. You are dissolving the ashes into liquid, and from a mental perspective, you are dissolving the ashes in your mind. All of these steps, of course, have their associations with the mental and spiritual parts of alchemy. I'm just really talking about the physical aspects for right now. The third stage is called separation, and this is where you are essentially discarding the waste and keeping the good stuff. The fourth stage is called conjunction. This is where you take the purified matter from separation and you start to create a new life with it, a new life form. You are creating a new self, or you are merging different parts of your soul or different parts of your mind. The fifth stage is called fermentation, and this is basically where the child that was birthed in the 4th stage is now becoming more mature. New life is brought into the mind and soul. The 6th stage is distillation. You are opening yourself up to new insights. It's all about purification. And then you are working to purify yourself based on these new insights. And the 7th and final stage is called coagulation. Here is where everything is solidified. There is a physical manifestation, mind, body, and soul. In this stage, all elements and levels of reality have become one. So in this video, we have discussed what alchemy is. We've talked about a brief history. We've defined physical alchemy, mental alchemy, spiritual alchemy. We've talked about the 7 different stages of an alchemical process. I'd like to hear from you if this is a topic that you are interested in. As I mentioned previously in different parts of this video, I would love to eventually do an alchemy series. So if you're interested in spiritual alchemy and mental alchemy, or maybe even deep diving into physical alchemy a little bit more and getting a little bit more sciencey, definitely let me know. This topic is huge, and I had a really hard time narrowing it down. This video easily could have been an hour or a couple hour long documentary, but I just simply don't have the time for that. So breaking it up into bite-sized pieces I think would be better for me and for you, hopefully, to be able to digest the material a little bit more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in another video soon.